The coffee pot felt heavier than usual in my hands, almost as if it were filled with all the unspoken words and unseen hours I had poured into my job over the last 15 years. The smell of the dark roast, usually a comforting aroma that signaled the start of a productive day, now felt like the scent of my own slow burnout. I stood just outside the boardroom, the muffled sounds of dress shoes shuffling and polite, meaningless laughter filtering through the polished oak door. My name is Eleanor, and for a decade and a half, I was the quiet engine of Sterling & Vance. I wasn't a partner or a senior executive. My name wasn't on any patents or major contracts. I was the administrative backbone, the one who knew that Mr. Sterling preferred his tea with a whisper of lemon, not a slice, and that Mrs. Vance's husband's birthday was on the 17th, a fact she herself often forgot. I was the keeper of schedules, the organizer of chaos, the silent guardian of office harmony. I was the one who made everything run so smoothly that no one ever noticed I was there, until they needed something. "Eleanor, could you just—" was the start of most sentences directed at me. And today was no different. It had come from Mark, a junior executive half my age with twice my ambition and a fraction of my experience. He had popped his head out of the boardroom an hour ago, a strained smile on his face as the partners prepared for a major client pitch. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice a little too loud, "big meeting. We need you to be a star and just keep the coffee flowing, okay?" He didn't wait for an answer, disappearing back into the room before I could even form a nod. Keep the coffee flowing. The words echoed in my mind, each one a small, sharp stone pelting my sense of worth. It wasn't the request itself. I had made coffee thousands of times. It was the casual dismissal in his tone. It was the reduction of my 15 years of dedication, of canceled vacations, of late nights finalizing reports, of mentoring new hires out of the goodness of my heart into the role of a perpetual beverage server. I looked at my reflection in the gleaming silver surface of the coffee pot. A woman of 52, with fine lines around her eyes that told stories of laughter, worry, and far too much screen time. But the eyes themselves looked tired, not just from a lack of sleep, but from a deeper exhaustion. The exhaustion of being consistently undervalued. That was the moment. It wasn't a lightning strike of revelation, but a quiet, profound click, like a lock finally turning. I had been a ghost in this machine for too long. A ghost who was, ironically, expected to keep everyone else's spirits up with caffeine. They saw me as part of the office furniture, as permanent and as functional as the copy machine. But furniture can be replaced. A ghost can choose to stop haunting the halls. I walked back to my desk, the heavy coffee pot still in hand. The boardroom door remained closed. They were in there talking about futures, about profits, about growth. My future, however, was not on their agenda. So I decided it was time I created my own. I set the pot down gently on my desk, next to my keyboard. I took a deep breath, opened a new document, and began to type. The words came more easily than any report I had ever written. They were honest, they were clear, and they were mine. It wasn't a plea or a complaint. It was a declaration. When I was finished, I printed the single sheet of paper. I folded it neatly, crisply, with the same precision I applied to every task in this office. Then, I picked up a tray, placed a fresh, steaming mug of coffee on it, and laid the folded paper right beside it, my letter of resignation. With my heart beating a steady, defiant rhythm, I walked back toward the boardroom. They wanted coffee. I would give them coffee. But I would serve it with a side of liberation. My liberation. My knuckles brushed against the cool, lacquered wood of the boardroom door. For a moment, my own history seemed to play out in the polished surface. 15 years of my life were contained within these walls, not in grand portraits or plaques, but in the silent, steady work that allowed for the portraits and plaques to exist in the first place. My reflection showed a woman who had mastered the art of being essential yet invisible, a paradox I had lived with for so long it felt like breathing. I remembered the Anderson account 7 years ago. Mr. Henderson, a senior partner just months from a celebrated retirement, had accidentally deleted the final version of a multi-million-dollar presentation. I can still picture his face, ashen and slick with a cold sweat, as he stared at his blank monitor. Panic had ripped through the executive wing like an electrical current. Voices were raised, fingers were pointed, and the air grew thick with the metallic taste of fear. But I had a copy. I always had a copy. I had stayed until 3 a.m. The night before, not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew Mr. Henderson's habit of tinkering with slides at the last minute. I had backed up the file on my personal drive out of a sense of duty that now felt like self-betrayal. When I spoke, my voice cut through the chaos. I have it right here. The room fell silent. 10 pairs of eyes turned to me, not with gratitude, but with sheer dumbfounded relief, as if a vending machine had suddenly dispensed a winning lottery ticket. The deal was saved. Mr. Henderson received a hearty slap on the back and a significant bonus. I received a rushed, "Couldn't have done it without you, Eleanor," as he and the team hurried off to a celebratory lunch at a steakhouse I couldn't afford. I watched them go from my office window, their laughter echoing up from the street, before I sat down to eat my sad desk salad alone. My mind drifted to a memory that stung with a more personal regret, a failure that no amount of professional success could ever mend. My son Daniel was in his 5th grade play. He had been cast as a tree. He had practiced his one line for weeks, standing straight and tall in our living room. "I am the mighty oak, strong and true." To him, it was the most important line in the entire script, and I had promised I would be there, sitting in the front row to see him deliver it. But that afternoon, an urgent, all-hands-on-deck crisis had erupted. A shipment of marketing brochures for a conference in Chicago had been sent to Dallas. It was a logistical nightmare born from pure carelessness, a problem that could have been avoided with a single confirmation call. But everyone else was too busy being important to handle the details. So, I handled them. For 4 agonizing hours, I was on the phone, cajoling shipping managers and calming frantic event coordinators. I fixed it, of course. I always did. The brochures would arrive, but by the time I slipped out of the office, heart pounding with the hope that I wasn't too late, the school auditorium was dark and empty. The silence was heavier than any boardroom meeting. I'll never forget the sound of Daniel's voice on the phone when I told him I'd missed it. It wasn't anger. It was a quiet deflation, the sound of a little boy learning for the first time that sometimes, in his mother's world, a box of glossy paper could be more important than his moment in the spotlight. And then there was Mark, the man who, just an hour ago, had relegated my entire existence to that of a coffee courier. I remembered him on his first day, fresh out of business school, so terrified he could barely make eye contact. I took him under my wing. I taught him the things they don't teach you in a lecture hall. I told him how Mr. Sterling's mood could be read by the way he held his pen. I showed him how to navigate Mrs. Vance's formidable defenses. I coached him through his first major presentation, staying late with him, turning his clumsy data points into a compelling story. I shared my knowledge, my carefully cultivated understanding of the human ecosystem of this office, because I believed in lifting others up. He was a quick study. He used that knowledge to climb, stepping on rungs that I had built and polished for him. Last month, in a team meeting, I suggested a workflow improvement, a small change that would save hours of redundant work. Mark cut me off mid-sentence, saying with a patronizing smile, "Eleanor, let's stick to the big picture stuff here," only to represent my exact idea as his own a week later to thunderous approval. He never even looked my way. These memories didn't fill me with rage anymore. That emotion had burned out long ago, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of truth. They were simply facts. They were the data points on a chart tracking the slow, methodical erosion of my spirit. The request for coffee wasn't an insult. It was the final, irrefutable data point. It was the QED at the end of a long, painful proof. It confirmed that in their eyes my value had a ceiling, and that ceiling was the lid of a coffee pot. My hand was steady on the brass handle. My breath was even. The fear, the years of quiet compliance had evaporated, leaving behind a serene and unshakable resolve. I was no longer a ghost, drifting through the halls hoping to be seen. I was the foundation they had built their castles on, and I was about to quietly, gracefully remove myself from the equation. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I had pictured it, a perfect mausoleum of corporate ambition. The long mahogany table, so polished it seemed to drink the light from the room, was a dark, still lake reflecting the pale, serious faces around it. 12 figures were seated, their bodies angled towards a large screen displaying a series of impenetrable charts and graphs. A language I was fluent in, though no one ever asked for my translation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the contrived urgency that passes for importance in places like this. When I pushed the door open, the smooth, practiced voice of one of the clients faltered for a second. 12 heads turned towards me. Their expressions were a gallery of predictable reactions. There was the mild, fleeting irritation of the clients, men in sharp suits who saw me as nothing more than a momentary disruption to their performance. There were the blank, indifferent stares of the junior partners, who had been trained to filter out anything that didn't directly impact the bottom line. And then there were the faces I knew so well. My eyes swept across them, taking a final inventory. There was Mr. Sterling at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture ramrod straight. He was a man who commanded respect, not through inspiration, but through a carefully cultivated atmosphere of fear. He saw people as assets or liabilities, entries on a balance sheet. I remembered him once telling a manager to trim the fat, referring to a 55-year-old accountant who had been with the company for 30 years. I knew, with a certainty that no longer hurt, which column I had always been in. Across from him sat Mrs. Vance, her jaw tight, a string of pearls around her neck that probably cost more than my car. She was the gatekeeper, the enforcer, the one who viewed kindness as a weakness and efficiency as the only virtue. She gave me a look that could freeze water, a silent, piercing rebuke for the interruption. It was the same look she'd given me when I had to leave early because my son had a fever. "Is it truly an emergency, Eleanor?" she had asked, as if a mother's love was an inconvenience to be audited. And then there was Mark. He was seated halfway down the table, leaning forward slightly, desperately trying to project an aura of command. When he saw me, his face tightened, and he gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a gesture that said, "Not now, Eleanor. Just leave the coffee on the sideboard like a good girl." It was a dismissal, a final pat on the head to the loyal office dog. He, like all the others, had never once considered that my interior world was as rich and complex as his own. He saw a function, not a person. I ignored them all. I did not scurry to the sideboard as I was expected to. Instead, I walked slowly, deliberately, along the edge of the room. My footsteps were soundless on the plush carpet, the only noise the gentle, steady beat of my own heart. It was a strange and intoxicating sensation. For 15 years, I had moved through these spaces trying to be invisible, to take up as little room as possible, to anticipate needs so seamlessly that my own presence was erased. Now I felt every inch of my own space. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, and for the first time, it didn't make me shrink. It anchored me. They had all turned back to their meeting, writing me off as a momentary glitch. Mark had started speaking again, his voice filled with a hollow confidence as he pointed to a rising trend line on the screen. "As you can see from the Q3 projections, our strategic realignment is already yielding significant—" He stopped mid-sentence. His voice choked in his throat. He stopped because I had not gone to the sideboard. I had walked directly to the head of the table, to the empty sacred space right beside Mr. Sterling. The silence that fell over the room this time was different. It wasn't the silence of polite pause. It was the heavy, uncomfortable, electrifying silence of a broken rule, of a script that had been suddenly and inexplicably set on fire. I placed the tray on the mahogany surface. The soft clink of the ceramic mug against the wood was as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. Everyone stared at the tray. They saw the single, pristine white mug, steam rising from it in a gentle, fragrant curl. And beside it, they saw the single folded sheet of crisp white paper. My offering. Mr. Sterling was the first to react. His eyes, the color of faded denim, moved from the tray to my face. The initial confusion hardened instantly into a glare of pure, undiluted anger. He was a man who detested surprises. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each syllable a frozen shard of ice. "What is the meaning of this?" I looked at him. I looked at Mrs. Vance, her lips a thin, bloodless line of outrage. I looked at Mark, his face a perfect mask of bewildered horror, as if he'd just seen a ghost. I had their complete, undivided attention. For 15 years, they had looked past me, through me. Today, they were finally, truly seeing me. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they would never forget this moment. I drew a slow, steadying breath. I was not the ghost of Eleanor anymore. I was not the coffee maker, or the problem solver, or the keeper of secrets. I was simply a woman who had finally found her voice. And I was about to use it. "The meaning, Mr. Sterling," I began, and my voice was a revelation, even to me. It was not the deferential, slightly apologetic tone they were used to. It was clear, steady, and resonant in the tomb-like silence of the room. It did not tremble, it did not waver. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "Is that you asked for coffee? And I have brought you coffee. It's the last cup of coffee I will ever serve in this office." I let the words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle upon the polished mahogany. Then I met the gaze of each person around that table, not as an inferior, but as an archivist closing a chapter on their behalf. For 15 years, I continued, my voice calm and deliberate. I have poured everything I have into this company. I poured my expertise into reports you signed your names to. I poured my weekends into fixing crises born from your carelessness. I poured my heart into mentoring junior colleagues like Mark, who have since forgotten the lessons but mastered the ambition. I have poured more of myself into the foundations of this company than you will ever find on a balance sheet. And in return, after all of that, I was reduced to a single, simple function: to keep the coffee flowing. I looked directly at Mark. The blotchy red of his shame had deepened. He looked utterly flayed, stripped bare of his corporate armor. He wasn't just embarrassed to be called out in front of the partners. He was facing a sudden, sickening reckoning with his own character. He had used my kindness as a ladder and never once looked down to see whose shoulders he was standing on. I am not an assistant, I said, my voice gaining a quiet, powerful strength. I am not a resource, and I am not a machine that you can simply command to produce coffee. I am a person who held the institutional memory of this place in her head and her heart. A person who celebrated your wins in silence and absorbed your failures so you never had to. And this person is resigning. That paper beside the mug is my official notice. I have served you, this company, and its goals faithfully. Now I am going to serve my own. I gestured gracefully toward the mug, a final, polite invitation. Please enjoy the coffee. I made it fresh. A choked, guttural sound came from Mr. Sterling. His face, a moment ago a thunderous shade of purple, was now pale with disbelief. He looked as if the very laws of physics had been suspended. His entire career was built on a predictable world of command and control, of hierarchies and silent obedience. I had not been insubordinate in a way he understood. I hadn't yelled or sworn or made a scene. I had simply, politely, and irrevocably withdrawn my consent to be devalued. He was a king who had just been informed by a pawn that the game was over, and he had no move left to make. Mrs. Vance looked as though she had been slapped. The pearls at her throat seemed to tighten. Her entire worldview, a carefully constructed hierarchy with her near the top, had been shaken by the quiet rebellion of someone she had long since written off as part of the office furniture. Furniture is not supposed to walk away. I did not wait for a response. I did not need their permission to leave. I had already dismissed them. With a final calm glance around the room, I turned my back on the polished table, on the stunned faces, on the scent of stale ambition. I pulled the door closed behind me, and the soft click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage opening. Walking through the office past the rows of desks was like walking through a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The hum of the computers, the ringing phones, it was all just noise. I walked past my own desk, a space I had occupied for more than 5,000 days. I saw the little potted succulent I had nursed for years, a testament to my ability to make things grow even under fluorescent lights. I saw the framed photo of Daniel, his gap-toothed fifth-grade smile a silent reminder of a promise I had broken for them. I saw the worn-out mousepad, the groove in it a perfect map of my tireless, unseen labor. I didn't take any of it. Those things belonged to the ghost of Eleanor. I was leaving her behind. When I stepped through the grand glass doors and onto the bustling street, the city air hit me with the force of a revelation. It smelled of exhaust fumes, hot pretzels, and possibility. The afternoon sun on my face felt like a benediction. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have another job lined up. For the first time in a decade and a half, my future wasn't a neatly scheduled calendar, but a blank, beautiful, terrifying page. And it was the most exciting thing I had ever seen. I had walked into that building a ghost, but I was walking out a person, ready to see what was next, ready to pour my own coffee, just for me. And so, my story isn't one of revenge, it's one of resurrection. It's about the profound, quiet courage it takes to reclaim your own narrative in a world that is constantly trying to write it for you. Sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't a shout, but a steady, dignified exit. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued, please share your own experience in the comments below. Let's create a community where every voice is honored. Remember to value yourself because your worth is not determined by your title, but by the truth in your heart. Your story matters. You matter.